The courtroom was tense, the bright lights casting sharp shadows on the weary faces of the city's people. The Los Angeles District Court in the First District was not typically a place where one would witness stories of justice. But today, it was the site of a fierce confrontation that few could have imagined. The entire courtroom was nearly silent, with only the sound of sighs from the spectators, all eyes fixed on the man sitting there. Jordan Harrison, a smug billionaire facing charges of fraud and exploiting the trust of thousands of impoverished families. Jordan, tall, with his carefully combed hair, dressed in a pricey dark gray suit, looked like the head of a global corporation, rather than someone accused of deceiving an entire generation. He didn't look at anyone, his attention solely on the phone in his hand, as if this wasn't the place where he would have to face justice. But his indifference couldn't hide the tension beginning to permeate the courtroom. Then Judge Rachel Bennett walked in. Her long black hair flowed lightly like a cloak, and her judicial robe left no doubt that she commanded respect. She was one of the most renowned judges in the legal system, never compromising on injustice. "All rise to welcome Judge Rachel Bennett." The bailiff struck his cane on the floor, his voice booming, and everyone stood up. Everyone except one. Jordan Harrison remained seated, not even glancing up. A deep silence settled over the courtroom. One could hear the soft murmurs from the audience, but no one dared speak out. Only Judge Bennett's gaze seemed sharp enough to tear through the thick silence. Jordan's arrogance was beginning to push the limits of patience, and this was just the beginning. The courtroom remained heavy with tension. Every statement from the prosecutor, every furrowed brow from the defense attorney, made the air feel even more stifling. The only sounds that filled the room were the constant murmurs from the spectators who had been following the trial from day one. Jordan Harrison seemed oblivious to the mounting tension. He sat casually holding his expensive phone, occasionally scrolling through a few messages, his eyes absent-mindedly focused on the screen, as if everything happening around him was nothing more than a game. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Andrea Mallory stood at the podium, concentrating on presenting irrefutable evidence of his crimes. "As we have demonstrated," Andrea said, her voice calm but resolute, "Jordan Harrison deceived thousands of people, individuals who placed their trust in the investment projects he promoted. These people didn't just lose money, they lost their futures." The courtroom fell silent, all eyes fixated on Jordan. He remained seated, his posture indifferent, as the accusations grew more severe. The people in the gallery could not help but feel a surge of anger at his arrogance. They saw themselves in Andrea's words, victims of deceit. As the trial began, no one could have predicted that the man sitting in the courtroom would exhibit such an attitude. Jordan Harrison, in his designer suit and exuding confidence, seemed completely unaware of the gravity of the situation he was facing. He had deceived so many people, yet in his eyes, it was all just a misunderstanding. Angela Martinez, one of the victims, sat right in the front. Her hair fell softly over her shoulders, her hands clutching her handbag. She struggled to maintain her composure as memories of the painful days flooded her mind. From the moment she invested in Harrison's project, she had been convinced that this was the one opportunity for her family to escape poverty. But now, she and her children had lost everything. "You destroyed my life," Angela said, her voice trembling as she took the witness stand. "I have no home, I have no job. I trusted you, and you took it all away." Her words echoed through the room, making the air feel unbearably heavy. Jordan didn't even look at her. Instead, he calmly smiled, a smile that reflected indifference, utterly unaffected by the pain he had caused. No one in the courtroom could have imagined just how far-reaching the deceit that Jordan Harrison had caused could be. This trial had dragged on for months, and by now, the evidence against him was undeniable. Witnesses had come forward to condemn him, speaking of shattered dreams and broken plans. One such witness was Peter Vaughn, a former firefighter who had spent his entire life saving others, only to have his future destroyed by the very man he had trusted. "He took everything from me," Peter said in the courtroom, his voice deep and choked with emotion. "I worked for 30 years to build a life for myself, but it all vanished because of his empty promises." The entire courtroom fell silent, no one daring to make a sound. Everyone could feel the pain in Peter's words. Stories like this were not rare in this case. Countless victims had been destroyed by Harrison's sweet-talking promises. But there was one thing they could never have anticipated: Jordan's utter disrespect for everything that was unfolding before him. The trial continued, and with each passing day, more testimonies and evidence were presented. But instead of changing his attitude, Jordan Harrison became increasingly smug and contemptuous of everything around him. He not only ignored justice, but he also showed blatant disregard for the victims he had destroyed. He kept using his phone throughout the trial, even sneering when some people presented their accusations. On the third day of the trial, Prosecutor Mallory presented a series of emails Harrison had sent to his assistants. These emails not only confirmed his deceit, but also revealed his utter greed. In one of the emails, he had instructed his assistants to make the numbers look good and convince those idiots to sign the contract. When these words were read aloud, the people in the courtroom could no longer contain their emotions. They glared at Jordan Harrison with eyes full of fury. Yet, even as all this evidence was being presented, Jordan's expression remained unchanged. He simply shrugged, as if none of what was happening had any impact on his life. Day after day, Jordan Harrison's attitude remained unchanged. Even in a tense moment, when witnesses testified that he had deceived them for money, he still sat there, casually shaking a pen in his hand, his expression as though he were simply attending a business meeting. The crowd of spectators couldn't help but feel a surge of anger as they watched Jordan remain unshaken by the testimonies of those whose lives he had destroyed. But on the fourth day of the trial, everything began to change. Angela Martinez, a strong woman who had lost her home and all her possessions because of Jordan's false promises, stood up to confront him. Her words were not only an expression of the pain of her loss, but also the final challenge to this arrogant criminal. "I once thought that only the poor had to pay for mistakes," Angela said, her voice firm yet filled with emotion. "But today, I stand here not to beg for mercy, but to demand what you stole from us. You may shun us, but you cannot shun your conscience." The courtroom fell silent, except for the quiet sound of tears running down Angela's face. Jordan remained silent, his eyes cold, not even blinking, as all eyes in the room were locked on him. But with each word from Angela, the tension in the room grew, glowing like a flame that was about to ignite. As soon as Angela finished her statement, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier than ever. Jordan Harrison glanced down, then back up, his face completely unreadable. He seemed unaware of the weight of the accusations leveled against him. But the truth could not be denied, and this courtroom could not allow him to escape the crimes he had committed. Prosecutor Mallory continued to lay out the evidence with clips of video recordings, capturing conversations between Jordan and his team of assistants. In one clip, Jordan sneered as he talked about the people who had lost their money, calling them fools and assuring his team that they would never see a single penny of it again. Each of his words felt like a slap in the face to the victims who had endured endless suffering due to his deceit. "This is undeniable evidence," Andrea said, turning to the bench. "His words not only show a total disrespect for justice, but they also reveal a complete lack of conscience. This is what we must condemn." Every word from the prosecutor echoed through the courtroom, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. The victims of Jordan, sitting in the room, were in tears as they watched the video. They had not only lost their money, but also their faith in justice. But today, They would not allow him to escape his crimes. Jordan Harrison maintained his emotionless facade, casually staring at the screen, completely unconcerned. Some in the courtroom began to feel that he truly feared nothing. But in those moments, what no one realized was that Judge Rachel Bennett was observing every one of his actions. With perfect calmness, Judge Bennett ordered the courtroom to quiet down. The whispers in the gallery gradually faded, leaving only the heavy silence. It was then that everyone realized Jordan's actions were not a display of arrogance, but an idiotic sense of complacency. And it was that very complacency that would lead him to his downfall. Judge Bennett began to address Jordan's behavior. She didn't need to raise her voice or show anger, for her calm demeanor was her greatest strength. Each word she spoke carried weight, making it impossible for Jordan to argue back. "You didn't just deceive the vulnerable. You also disrespected this court," she said, her voice steady but unwavering. "You believed that your wealth and power would protect you from all accountability. But you were wrong. No one stands above justice, and no one can escape its punishment." Judge Bennett spoke these words with a composed tone, yet they struck Jordan like a heavy punch to the gut. He knew that this court would show no mercy. As the day of sentencing approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more tense. The victims had patiently waited, not just for punishment to be delivered to Jordan, but to hear a voice that would stand for justice, a voice that would affirm that no one could take away the lives of others without paying the price. The day of sentencing finally arrived. The courtroom was packed. Victims, their families, the press, and even ordinary citizens gathered to witness a moment they believed would mark a turning point in their lives. Before them sat Jordan Harrison, his face cold, as though he had no care for what was happening. But everyone in the room knew that this moment would signify the end of his days of power. Judge Bennett stood up, and the sound of her gavel striking the desk resonated like a declaration of war against greed and deception. "Jordan Harrison, you have been found guilty of all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice," she declared, her voice firm, unwavering. "Your actions have not only harmed countless struggling families, but they have also undermined the trust of society in our justice system. Today, you will face the consequences of the crimes you have long sought to avoid." "Given all that you have caused," Judge Bennett continued, "this court has decided to sentence you to 25 years in prison with no possibility of early release. Additionally, the court orders that all of your assets be liquidated immediately to compensate the victims. Every penny you have stolen from them will be returned, and you will no longer have a single cent to your name." The sentence rang out, and the courtroom fell into silence. A few people couldn't hold back their emotions. Tears began to fall. Angela Martinez hugged her daughter tightly, while Peter Vaughn could only look up, unable to believe what he had just heard. Finally, justice had been served. Jordan Harrison sat still, but the change in his gaze was undeniable. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like he had become aware of the harsh reality he now faced. But before he could speak, 3 police officers approached, ready to escort him out. For the first time throughout the trial, Jordan Harrison no longer exuded arrogance. As he was escorted out, his eyes no longer held the self-satisfied look they once had. As he was led away, a soft sound broke the silence of the courtroom, the sound of a single clap, followed by a rising wave of applause that swelled like a tide. The entire gallery clapped to celebrate the victory of justice. Judge Bennett showed no outward emotion as she watched the scene unfold. She had done her job, and justice had been served. She returned to her duties without showing joy or satisfaction. She knew this was but a small victory, and the journey to restore justice for the victims would continue. But today, a criminal had paid the price. As the door to the courtroom closed,
The atmosphere in the court became heavy, yet filled with hope. The victims sat there, feeling as though a burden had been lifted from their shoulders.
Angela Martinez looked toward the door, holding her daughter's hand tightly. All those long months of fighting to keep her family together now seemed to fade. And for a brief moment, she could finally find peace. But this peace couldn't erase the painful memories of the days of loss. Peter Vaughn stood up, looking around at the crowd. He said nothing, simply closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. The memories of years spent working tirelessly to build a future had vanished into smoke. But now, seeing the light of hope flicker in his heart, he felt as though he had been reborn. "Not everything we've lost will be returned," Peter said to a fellow victim sitting in the courtroom. "But at least we can say that justice has prevailed." Angela turned to look at Peter, her eyes now glimmering with a renewed sense of belief. "Yes, but today is a day I'll never forget. It's not just about the money. It's about the price paid for what he did." The courtroom remained silent.
There was a sense that, although the trial had ended, everything had not truly been resolved. The victims, despite feeling a sense of victory, knew that the pain they had endured would not simply disappear. For them, justice couldn't undo what had been lost, but at least it had brought about a fitting punishment for the deceitful man who had caused it all. Night fell, and the yellow lights in the courthouse began to fade.
Those who left the courtroom still carried a sense that a chapter had closed, but something lingered in their minds. Angela stood in the hallway, her gaze distant. She couldn't stop thinking about the future. Could she truly recover from everything that had happened? Would her children ever regain the dreams that had been stolen from them? But there was one thing she felt clearer than ever. She had fought and she had won. She was no longer the victim of a con artist. Today, she was part of something bigger, a greater victory that she could never have imagined. Angela turned to look back at those still in the courtroom. There was something in their eyes, a spark of hope. That was the greatest value of justice. And that was why, despite everything, she knew that the wounds wouldn't last forever. One day, she would find her life again. After the trial, all the reporters gathered around the courthouse, interviewing those involved. A group of journalists approached Angela. "How do you feel now that the trial is over?" one reporter asked. Angela looked into the camera, her eyes no longer filled with confusion or fear. She smiled softly and replied, "It feels like a door has been opened. Life isn't just about money or assets. It's about fairness, about respect. And today, I feel like I've gotten it all back." Angela's answer was not just a personal statement, but a powerful message to all those who had endured injustice. It was a reminder that justice is not just a legal concept, but a living action, something that everyone can protect together. In the distance, Peter Vaughn was talking to an old friend. Though there was no sign of joy on his face, he felt a sense of relief. His life may have been forever changed, but at least he knew he would no longer live under the threat of con men like Jordan Harrison. In the offices of the courthouse, lawyers and court staff began to tidy up the paperwork. But one thing they couldn't tidy away was the feeling that justice had been served. Those who worked within the legal system knew that anyone could be caught in the whirlwind of deception. But in the end, justice would prevail. Judge Bennett sat back in the courtroom, gazing at the case files related to this trial. She didn't feel satisfaction or pride, but a deep sense of responsibility.
She knew that justice was an ongoing effort, never truly complete, until every victim had been compensated, and everything they lost had been returned. For her, justice wasn't a personal battle, but something vital to society. Every individual had the right to be protected, and sitting in the judge's seat wasn't a position of power, but one of undeniable duty. She turned to look out the window, feeling the shift in the air. Today was a victory, but it was just a small victory in a long battle.
And she knew there would be many more battles ahead. But at least today, they had regained a part of justice. Judge Bennett stood up, gripping the gavel. A sense of fulfillment washed over her, even though she had been through many similar trials before. But everything has its price, and today, justice had prevailed. Outside the courtroom, the lights from the street lamps began to illuminate the streets of Los Angeles. The reporters were still waiting, but no one was concerned with Jordan Harrison's story anymore. His tale had come to an end, and now all attention was focused on the people who truly needed help. Angela and Peter walked out, hand in hand. They didn't speak, but in their eyes there was hope. They knew that while the scars remained, at least they had found justice. The story of Jordan Harrison would not be remembered for long, but the story of those who fought to reclaim justice, those who never gave up despite the hardships, would live on forever. A few weeks after the trial, the lives of the victims slowly began to stabilize, but the psychological wounds inflicted by Jordan Harrison had yet to heal. Even though they had received a portion of the assets seized from him, for them, the money could never restore what had been lost.
Families who once had promising futures now had to live with the painful memory of their past. Angela Martinez, though burdened with her own sorrow, continued to work and care for her family. She was no longer the woman defeated by financial ruin. She had regained the power to shape her own future. Seeing her children smile again, she felt that, despite everything, good things could return. Peter Vaughn had also found his trust in life again. He secured a new job and no longer had to depend on others. The stories he shared with his new friends were not just about financial recovery, but about the emotional healing after facing the devastation caused by a criminal. On long evenings as he sat by the fire, Peter often told his children and grandchildren about a man he had trusted completely, only to be deceived. But he never allowed himself to be defeated. The lesson from his own pain was one of strength and perseverance, values he hoped to pass down to the next generation. However, not everyone could find peace immediately. While many began returning to normal life, the old pains didn't easily vanish. The people deceived by Jordan Harrison had not only lost money, they had lost their trust in the core values of society. Yet those very moments helped them realize something more important. Sometimes, justice doesn't come right away, but it always finds a way to reach those who deserve it. Angela began participating in community activities, sharing her story to help others. She became a leader in a group that supported victims of financial scams. She was no longer a victim, but a guiding light for those still struggling in the shadows of their pain. One of the important meetings Angela attended was a sharing session at a national conference on financial fraud. She stood on stage looking into the faces of those who were listening intently. She spoke with strength, recounting her journey from falling into Harrison's trap to finding the power to fight back. Her story was not just about loss, but about the strength of recovery, about rising from adversity. Angela's words resonated with everyone in the room. Her voice became a beacon of hope for those who had been similarly deceived, a reminder that, despite the pain and setbacks, it was possible to rebuild, to reclaim their lives, and to never give up on justice. However, the story of Jordan Harrison didn't end there. After receiving his 25-year sentence and having his assets seized, he was incarcerated in a federal prison, where he would face the very people he had once deceived. Though he had tried to use his wealth and power to live a comfortable life, now all he had were the cold walls of the prison. Harrison could not accept the truth that he could no longer buy his freedom. He had once believed that money could solve everything, that it could protect him from any consequence. But now he had to live in a world where power could not buy justice. He had grown accustomed to manipulating everything,
But now he was faced with an unavoidable truth. In this world, people like him could not endure forever. Day after day, inside the prison, Harrison tried to find ways to exert influence, to maintain some semblance of power. But it was all in vain. His former allies, those he once thought would help him, no longer cared about him. He had lost everything. While he might survive in prison, he would never reclaim what he had lost. The life he had built through deceit, manipulation, and arrogance had been completely stripped away. In the harsh reality of his new existence, the man who had once believed himself untouchable could only face the relentless truth. There was no escaping the consequences of his actions. A month after the trial, life seemed to have returned to a sense of peace. The community where Angela lived organized a small ceremony to honor the victims of financial fraud and to encourage people to stand up against fraudulent behavior. Angela participated and spoke at the event, sharing her story and urging everyone to always remain vigilant against promises that seemed too good to be true. Angela looked out into the distance, where her children were playing in the yard. Her children no longer had to live in fear and anxiety like before.
Each day was a new day, and now she could smile. Not because she had won financially, but because she had regained her trust in life. Angela's speech ended with a powerful call to action. We are not victims of circumstance. We have the power to choose how we live, and I choose to live with faith and hope. These words echoed through the gathering, serving as a reminder to everyone that no matter what, justice will always prevail in the end. And so, after many months, the victims of Jordan Harrison gradually regained their strength. They were no longer anonymous victims in a long story of deceit, but rather they had become winners in a battle not only against Harrison, but also against their own fears and losses. Peter Vaughn, with his unwavering resolve, continued his life. He didn't just rebuild what had been lost, but he became a protector of justice in the community. He became involved in programs supporting victims of fraud, helping them restore their lives. The losses he had endured had transformed him into a stronger person, one who was ready to assist the vulnerable and remind them that justice may come late, but it would never overlook them. Angela and Peter had accomplished something greater than any amount of money could provide. They had rebuilt their lives and become guiding lights for those around them, living proof of the power of perseverance and fairness. For them, today was not only a turning point in justice, but also in their belief in the noble values that society continues to uphold. Finally, after a long wait, the trial came to an end. The punishment for Jordan Harrison wasn't just the conclusion for an arrogant con man, but also a valuable lesson for anyone still dreaming of escaping justice. People remembered the trial, not for the name of Jordan Harrison, but for the ones like Angela, Peter, and the other victims who stood up to reclaim justice. They were the true victors, not the greedy ones. Angela and Peter, along with many other victims, had gradually healed. Although the losses could never be erased, they had rebuilt their lives. They knew that while some wounds might never fully heal, life must go on. And more than ever, they had learned that justice is not something you can buy. It is a value that we all must fight to protect. One weekend morning, Angela took her daughter for a walk in the park. She no longer felt fear about the future. Watching her daughter play joyfully, Angela realized that what she had lost could never bring true happiness. Happiness didn't lie in material things. It was in the simple moments of life. "We have won," Angela said to her daughter, her eyes glowing with joy. In a small house near the Los Angeles beach, Peter Vaughn continued his life. Although he had lost everything, he never saw himself as a failure. He had regained his resilience and self-respect. With each passing day, he felt himself growing stronger, for he had overcome the greatest challenge a man could face: betrayal by those he trusted most. One day,
he received a call from a group of lawyers working with victims of other financial fraud cases. They needed his help. He had become a symbol of recovery and determination, and now he could assist others in avoiding the fate he had endured. Peter spent much of his time sharing his experiences and supporting other victims. For him, this was how he could give back what he had lost, not through money, but through the power of sharing, empathy, and mutual support. He knew that justice wasn't only found in the courtroom, but also in the small acts of kindness and help that people offer one another every day. Since the trial had ended, the stories about Jordan Harrison gradually faded into the background. Although his name was still mentioned in articles, the stories of his victims and their fight continued to be shared widely. They had become symbols of resilience and courage. Their story wasn't just about deception. It was about trust, humanity, and never giving up. Angela had become a leader in her community, particularly in campaigns raising awareness about financial fraud. She had become a protector of justice, helping the wounded and offering them comfort. She still remembered the early days when she felt abandoned. But now, she was able to help others like herself. Invited to participate in various seminars, Angela shared her story with those in attendance. She didn't just talk about the loss, but also about how she had overcome it. She shared that the most important thing was never to let pain control your life. Instead, use it as a driving force to fight, to stand up, and to reclaim yourself. The following month, during the Justice Commemoration Day in Los Angeles, a special event was held to honor the victims of financial fraud. At this ceremony, Angela Martinez was recognized for her courage and resilience. She walked onto the stage to accept her award, but instead of feeling proud of what she had accomplished, her thoughts were focused on the others she could help. As she received the award, she said, "Justice is not something we can see immediately. It's not something that money or power can buy. Justice comes to us when we don't give up, when we keep fighting for what is right. Today, I stand here not because I am the winner, but because we all are. Justice has been served, and we, the victims, have become the true winners." The audience in the hall applauded, not just because of her words, but because of the powerful message Angela had conveyed to them. No matter how tough life gets, as long as you don't give up, justice will eventually prevail. When the trial was over and the cases had been resolved, Jordan Harrison still faced the grim reality of his days in prison. But now his story was no longer what people focused on. He had become a small part of a much larger narrative. The story of resilience, the strength of those who refused to give up, no matter how much pain and disappointment they faced. People like Angela and Peter had proven that justice doesn't always come immediately, but it will always find a way. Their persistence, courage, and refusal to surrender had changed their lives and impacted the community around them. And while Jordan Harrison's story may fade into obscurity, the stories of those who fought for justice will live on forever. Because they didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for everyone who had ever been hurt by deceit and lies. The story of Jordan Harrison may have ended, but the lessons from it continue to resonate. Justice is not a simple battle, and it doesn't always come immediately. However, it will always find its way to those who deserve it, to those who bravely stand up to protect the core values of society. Angela Martinez and Peter Vaughn are living proof of this. They didn't give up. They fought not only for themselves, but also for others, for the countless, nameless victims. They showed that no matter how harsh life may be, resilience and determination can lead us to the ultimate victory. So when you sit back and reflect on your own life, remember that justice is not only the responsibility of authorities.
Each of us can be a part of justice. Each of us can stand up when it is needed. Never let injustice cloud your belief in the good things in life.